Good morning. I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts. Welcome back to the Mayor's Table. My guest this morning is City Manager Rob Mays. Rob, it's good to have you back with us again.
I'm happy to be here.
Rob, we're going to talk in this episode about what we have internally affectionately referred to as the orange barrel issue.
Yeah.
And of course the orange barrels are what is marking a lot of construction activity on our streets and roads in the city of Farmington. And you know, quite frankly, there are a lot of orange barrels out there, and there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of money being spent to improve the infrastructure in our city. I'd like you to address why it is that we're seeing so much construction activity on the part of the city of Farmington at this particular time.
Well, this is a great topic, and it's one I've really been looking forward to us addressing. It's somewhat ironic to find yourself as a government official or an elected official almost feeling like you have to apologize or defend the fact that our community is investing in its future. You and I have talked before, and I've joked before but it's really true. There's only two kinds of input I get on construction. Either we're not doing enough or we're doing too much. There's no right amount. And that's because it's obviously an inconvenience. But what I really like to do is I'm hoping to change this for our citizens to really understand this as something positive. And it really delineates what our future as a community is about. We live in a time when so many communities are neglecting infrastructure investment for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's political will. It's very difficult to raise the funds to invest in infrastructure. Sometimes it's just neglect or bad management. But the fact is, as a nation, we are failing in infrastructure investment. The Society of Civil Engineers has recently completed a survey nationally of our country's infrastructure, critical infrastructure, from roads to bridges to electric infrastructure to water lines. We get a D+ as a nation. It's something that's been neglected and cannot be neglected in the future. As an interesting tidbit, in the city of Washington, D.C., there are water lines in existence being used that were there involved during the Civil War. That's an extreme example and a kind of an anecdotal one, but it's nevertheless true. So the reason we're investing in infrastructure is because we need to. The reason that it's intensified during one season is a couple of reasons. Street paving is really the one that people are noticing now, because it's limited to a fairly brief season when the weather is warm enough for the asphalt to settle. Additionally, it's dependent upon the availability of the crews that have the specialized equipment, multi-million-dollar equipment that we could never afford to have ourselves. Those crews are in high demand, and when you get them, you get them. And while they're here and they've spent significant money, of course we pay to mobilize that equipment here, you've just got to run it and get it done. And that's why so much happens at one time, hence the name Orange Barrel Season.
Let's talk about a few of these projects specifically. You know, we've seen the resurfacing of Pinion Hills Boulevard, segments of it. That appears to be completed now, in large part at least. We've seen some repaving, obviously repaving project on 20th Street, but 20th Street is really a much bigger project than just street resurfacing. We've got some water line replacement there. We've got some electrical utility replacement, putting that overhead lines underground. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on along 20th Street and how much longer that project's going to take.
Well, 20th Street is definitely the most intense project going on. Most of the other projects are either minor water line replacements or street paving. The street paving tends to kind of get in and get out, and it's not too much of an invasion into the public. But on 20th Street, we're combining, as you mentioned, a mainline water lines being replaced. We are widening the sidewalks to meet required ADA federal requirements, and we are moving telephone poles out of the sidewalk and then burying those electric lines. And that includes all the other utilities, from the cable company, the phone company. We have to coordinate all those activities. It's really part of both an ADA requirement that we have to be making X amount of progress every year towards ADA requirement in our sidewalks, as well as focusing on our complete streets design philosophy to create positive places where people can have multimodal transportation, including, so in this case, it'll be widened sidewalks and safe, comfortable, aesthetic feel as you walk up and down that corridor.
The water lines in that area, I assume, are some of the older vintage lines in the city, and we know that we have many, many miles of 1950s aged water and sewer lines, and we've got a program in place where rates now for water and sewer service include a replacement, restoration, repair component, and so we're spending that money, and that's what people are seeing right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to kind of equate these street improvements with some of the other things that we're doing in the city of Farmington, where we're addressing aging infrastructure. The Civic Center is a good example of that. Almost a 40-year-old facility now that's beginning to show its age, needs some internal upgrades, significant internal upgrades, and we'll get some significant external upgrades as well, but it'll bring it into the 2010, 2020 time frame, and it's much needed work. We're going to have other kinds of projects like that as well. So providing services from the government, from local government, involves spending money to renew or upgrade or improve, and that's what we're seeing here.
Well, and when you neglect that R&R, as we call it, the renewal and replacement of infrastructure, you spend many, many times more money in the long run. Depending on whether you're talking about what type of infrastructure, you're talking probably 3 to 7 times the cost if you wait until your infrastructure fails. And so that's one of the reasons we have an aggressive program. Our mayor and council support that program. In 2016, we budgeted over $51 million in capital improvements and upgrades to our infrastructure. In 2017, it's nearly $70 million. It includes, for example, many miles of water lines, upgrades to our water treatment plant, so we can stay within EPA requirements. So sometimes it's not just about use, it's about keeping up with technology and the regulatory environment. If we don't invest, for example, in our wastewater treatment plant, we're subject to as much as $1 million a day fines. You just can't wait till those things happen and be going to the public and explaining why you let things go. You know, coincidentally right now, our community to our neighbors to the east are dealing with the dramatic, consequences of a water treatment plant that wasn't kept up. So you just can't wait until things are a crisis, and we try to stay ahead of them, and we are very proactive in the city of Farmington, and a lot of investment is made.
Let's explain to our viewers what the source of revenue is for these expenditures that we're making right now. Millions of dollars, where does that money come from?
Well, again, it depends on what the project is. So for example, those are total budget numbers. Most of those monies are dedicated, restricted sources that have to be spent on that. For example, road paving money, the ordinance where that money is taxed requires it be reinvested into streets. So for example, one area is the electric utility. So the source of funds there is the Electric Enterprise Fund. We're spending nearly $27 million in transformer upgrades, electric lines, poles, and big expenditures on substations to keep our electric system up to date, to keep it handling the power demands of today, and to handle the redundancies that are needed to keep the reliance that people expect. Water and wastewater funds, same thing, but you mentioned it, built into the water and wastewater rate structure is money that is dedicated, it has to be spent on reinvestment of the system. It can't be spent on operations. That was a courageous move that the mayor and council did about 8 years ago to start tackling water and wastewater issues. Again, without it, you sit back and watch your system crumble. So it just depends on the fund and on the project. We're doing small projects like replacing aging playgrounds to keep them safe and ADA compliant and up to date. Those are coming from funds that are dedicated to the Parks and Rec Department. You mentioned the Civic Center. That's not actually included in the numbers I've given, but there's a special fund created by the imposition of of an additional fee on hotels that has to be spent on that. It can't be spent on other things.
As we close this segment out, if you would, Could you speculate as to when most of this activity will be completed?
Well, what orange barrel season will be run through the summer, because that's where the weather really allows for it. But you'll see the dramatic amount of paving start to diminish here. One of our contract crews has already left. One of them is still working. 20th Street, that entire project being done will certainly take till the end of this summer.
Right. Rob, thank you for being here. I've had many people in the community ask me about the level of activity, and I think for the most part, people understand that these are necessary city functions and that they're improving the quality of life in our community. A lot of that isn't actually seen. A lot of it's underground or on the surface, but definitely it's an improvement in our community and investment in our future. And in closing this segment, I just want to urge viewers and citizens in the city of Farmington to keep your patience. Don't become too frustrated. I empathize with you. I've actually become frustrated as I try to maneuver through the traffic congestion and the way in which traffic is configured as our crews are out on the roads doing this work. But bear in mind that it's all for the ultimate good of our community. I want to thank you for joining us once again on the Mayor's Table, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Monday.